Next time you walk down a jet bridge, look at the very back of the plane. You'll see a tiny hole that looks like a basic exhaust pipe. But that assumption is completely wrong. In reality, that hole is the breathing exhaust of a fully independent, hidden, third jet engine. But why would engineers shrink a massive turbine and hide it inside the narrowest part of the plane? To answer that, you have to look back at the 1960s. Before this tiny engine was invented, the world's most advanced commercial jets were actually completely helpless. They couldn't turn on their own AC or even start their main engines without massive external power trucks holding them on the ground. Today, we're looking at the desperate gamble that finally cut the aircraft's umbilical cord, and why this hidden third engine is actually the ultimate backup plan keeping you out of the ocean. To understand why they crammed a secret third engine into the tail, you have to look at the biggest illusion of the early jet age. Up in the air, early commercial jets were technological marvels. They were independent, sleek, and incredibly fast. But the moment they touched the ground and shut down, they became completely helpless. You see, you cannot just turn a key to start a commercial airplane. A jet engine is not like a car engine. To get a massive turbofan to fire up, you first have to spin its heavy titanium compressor blades to thousands of revolutions per minute. Only once those blades are spinning at a violent, self-sustaining speed can you introduce jet fuel and an igniter spark to create thrust. But spinning those massive, heavy blades from a dead stop requires an immense blast of highly compressed air. And early airplanes did not have that air on board. Because of this, they were entirely dependent on an umbilical cord. Airports had to employ massive fleets of incredibly loud, diesel-guzzling machines called huffer carts. These were external ground power units that literally pumped highly compressed bleed air and raw electricity into the plane just so it could wake up. This created a massive, multi-million-dollar bottleneck for the entire aviation industry. A commercial jet could only fly to airports that owned this specific ground equipment. If a flight had to make an emergency diversion due to weather and landed at a smaller regional airport that didn't own a huffer cart, the plane was permanently stranded. It became a multi-million-dollar paperweight. It couldn't start its primary engines. It couldn't turn on its own air conditioning. It couldn't even power the lights in the cabin. The planes were fast, but they were entirely dependent on a primitive ground infrastructure. Therefore, the airlines were bleeding millions of dollars on delays and severely limited route options. They desperately needed to cut the umbilical cord. The solution was brilliant, but it had to be completely hidden. Engineers realized they needed to take the exact same turbine technology used in a primary jet engine, shrink it down to a fraction of its size, and stuff it into the only empty space left on the aircraft, the extreme rear of the tail. They called it the Auxiliary Power Unit, or the APU. It runs on the plane's own main fuel supply. It generates its own electrical power, and crucially, it produces the massive pneumatic air pressure required to blast the main engines to life without any help from the ground. When you board a flight today and you hear that deep humming sound and feel the AC blowing before the plane has even pushed back from the gate, that isn't the main engines. That is the tail hole breathing. The APU gave airplanes their total independence. That was its original financial purpose. But engineers quickly realized that having a fully independent, secret power plant running in the background wasn't just a matter of convenience. When things go catastrophically wrong at 30,000 feet, it is the only thing keeping you alive. Most people assume that if the main engines fail, the plane just becomes a giant glider. But modern jets don't work like that. They aren't purely mechanical, they are entirely controlled by computers. They are fly-by-wire. Your main wing engines do much more than just provide forward thrust. They generate 100% of the electrical power and the hydraulic pressure required to move the heavy wing flaps, steer the rudder, and keep the vital computer screens on in the cockpit. If a plane loses all engine power mid-flight, it doesn't just become a graceful glider. It becomes a 70-ton, uncontrollable metal brick plunging toward the Earth in total darkness. On January 15, 2009, this exact nightmare became a reality. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 struck a massive flock of Canada geese shortly after takeoff from New York's LaGuardia Airport. In an instant, both main engines ingested the birds and were completely destroyed. At exactly 3,000 feet over a densely populated city, the Airbus A320 lost all forward thrust, all primary electrical generation, and all main hydraulic pressure. Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger had mere seconds to react before the plane fell out of the sky. But before he communicated his emergency with air traffic control, and before he finalized his impossible plan to ditch the aircraft in the freezing river, his very first critical action was reaching up to the overhead panel and flipping a single switch. He turned on the APU. That small, hidden engine inside the tail immediately roared to life. It did not provide thrust to keep them in the air, but it instantly restored emergency electricity to the cockpit computer screens, therefore returning hydraulic control of the wings and the tail to the pilots. Without that hidden exhaust hole in the tail breathing life back into the dying aircraft's computers, Sully would not have had the physical ability to maneuver the plane away from the city skyline, pull the nose up, and safely glide into the Hudson River. A piece of technology originally designed in the 1960s simply to keep airplanes from being tethered to ground trucks secretly became the ultimate failsafe. Because that tiny, hidden engine was breathing in the tail, 155 people didn't end up at the bottom of the Hudson River. The world is entirely held together by these invisible lifelines. That small hole in the tail isn't just an exhaust. It is a mechanical heartbeat keeping you out of the ocean. But if you think airplanes are the only massive systems secretly held together by a single thread, look at your phone. You've been sold a lie about the cloud. Your entire digital life is actually hanging by a fragile, rusty plumbing system at the bottom of the sea. If you want to see the multi-billion-dollar corporate cover-up keeping you completely blind to how the internet actually works, click the video on screen right now. I will see you there.